Well, before we get started with the next part of the lesson, coloring and cell shading, let's make a new document first because I want to give you a really basic run through of what tools I'll be using and just a general understanding of the different type of cell shading and what cell shading is. So I'm just going to make a new document again. So right here I'm going to just explain a really general thing about cell shading. Basically, let's say you have a ball. So I'll be using the lasso tool and just selecting the ball shape and use a fill and just fill it with just any color. Let's say red. And you notice that this part is gray. That's because this layer is set at normal right now. For cell shading, you want to set the line layer as multiply. So here we have this red ball. Give me a second. Okay, here we go. And what cell shading really is instead of shading it, rendering it really smoothly, it uses really clean-cut lines to define the light and shadow. So above the color layer that we have here, I have another layer that I'll be setting as multiply. And this is the shadow layer. And just give a really quick demonstration. I'll be going over the actual details when I'm actually coloring this main picture. But what cell shading really is let me choose a gray color. You want to render this ball. Then you select the shadow area. I'm just doing it really roughly, just keep in mind. And you fill it. And basically this will make it like a cartoony ball shape, sphere shape. There's a different type of cell shading depending on the different artists, and this is a two-tone cell shading because there's two tones right here and the line is really simply cut. There's some artists that likes to go beyond this and make a little bit of variation of cell shading, and what they do is, let me select a brush and choose a soft edge brush. What they do is they combine the hard edge and the soft edge and have some soft edge as part of the shadow as well. And this is a common type of cell shading that people do. Some people only uses the hard edge, let me just undo it, for cell shading, and some people add the soft edge to it as well. And this is a two-tone cell shading. There's also the three-tone cell shading, where you add one more multiply layer and you select an even darker part of the shadow of the ball. Just for example, and you fill it here, and you see there's a darker area right here, and this is a three-tone cell shading. As you can see, there's three tones right here, and whether you do two-tone or three-tone is really up to you, but personally I wouldn't recommend going more than three-tone. Probably four-tone, maybe just at like very extreme cases where you really need one extra darker part of the shadow. But usually the most common method is two-tone and three-tone. Go back to a line layer and just draw a box, for example. For something that's cylinder or kind of have a lot of curvy shape, two-tone or three-tone is both fine. But for something that's very angular, for example, a box shape, I won't draw there's an imaginary inside line here. And again, let me fill it with a base color first. And click fill and choose blue. And choose a gray for the first shadow area. A lot of times for blocky areas such as mechanic or robot, It's sometimes hard to define a shape just by using two-tone. Let me just give an example right here. Right here you can see that it's you could obviously see it's a box shape, but as it get to more complicated shape, especially for these things where there's three or more surfaces where it's distinct surface, sometimes the two tones is just not enough to show the exact shape of the object, and therefore a lot of times you might want to go for a third tone to actually show the box in a more three-dimensional view. The nice thing about cell shading is that it's very fast, and the final outcome of the image is actually very clean and crisp. So this is a very basic idea of how cell shading is. And one extra step that some people might go up beyond this is adding highlights to cell shading. And let's create one extra layer. And I'll use overlay. Some people use screen, normal, overlay, but for now I use overlay as an example. And I'll switch this. And for a ball, some people like to, you could add a highlight like this to give it one extra push to make it look three-dimensional. And for the box as well, you could probably add a highlight to the edge right here to have this push it one step further. Whether or not you use two-tone, three-tone, or add highlight is really up to your own personal style and what you're trying to achieve. And this is basically a really quick run-through of how the cell shading will work. I want to get into two little extra things before we get started. And if you go to the lasso tool, you'll notice that there's this checkbox called anti-alias. And what it does is, let me give you a quick example, and I have to zoom in to show this clearly. With the anti-alias setting on, I select something and fill it. Oops, I select the wrong layer. Select something and let me delete what I just did. Okay, select something and fill it. Select a darker color and fill it. You'll notice that if I zoom in to the edge, you see how the edge right here is blurry and